Well, good afternoon. Oki, Sinatapi, Nistu, Nidaniko. That means my name in Blackfoot is Mokoyo Sokoi. It's my second Blackfoot name. My first Blackfoot name was Stukama, and my Irish name is Theda Newbreast. Has a social security number and all that kind of stuff. So, welcome to the Native Wellness Institute's Power Hour, where we have a very special guest today. And so, we welcome you to the 39 weeks. And yesterday, we kind of had part one. And so, we're going to continue the dialogue. So, we welcome you to comment in the comments, to ask questions. We plan on giving some resources before this hour is over, but we just wanted to open a door with Asa to talk about in our communities, how do we begin to thrive, and how do we begin the resilience, and how do we kind of take off some of those uncolonized ideas that maybe came with settlers, or maybe came on the media, or that were developed within the media arena, that try to influence us to not be our authentic self. And so we welcome you. And I'd like, just in case, you didn't get to join us yesterday, I would like to welcome our guest, Asa Wright, and he would like to share with us. We're kind of making this platform. We have our, of course, we have our bullets, and we have our, we took your questions from yesterday, and we're just going to flow into this. So Asa, would you please introduce yourself to everyone, just in case no one was here yesterday?
Yeah. Waklisi Damadichki, Gasasis Asa Wright, Wixikni Modakni Yohuskin. Hello, how are you? My name is Asa Wright. I'm Klamath Modoc and Yehuskin from Chiloquin, Oregon. And I'm calling in today from the occupied homelands of the Multnomah and Chinook peoples, or so-called Portland, Oregon. And I'm just grateful to be here sharing space with you all today. My pronouns are he, him, and I identify as two-spirit trans person. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here for part two. And dive in. I just want to also just do the same disclaimer that I did yesterday, that, I'm only an expert in my own lived experience, and there's uh, many stories and experiences out there within the LGBTQ queer community, two spirit community, um, and as probably as many experiences as there are stars in the sky. So I just want to be mindful of that, and that what I'm sharing is from my own perspective and my own lived experience. So thank you for having me. I think just to dive into your question about what you just posed, I think it's really important. A lot of our communities are having discussions right now around decolonizing and what that looks like, and to work within self-determination for our own people. And I think it's important to keep in mind that when we're thinking about decolonizing, that we're thinking about breaking down those gender systems and ideas around sexuality. And just to be clear, like, those are two separate things that we're talking about. One, sexuality, which, if you think of as an umbrella that has a lot of stuff underneath it, that's complex, and it's not black or white. There's a lot of gray matter in there. And then the same with gender, being a big umbrella and a lot of layers under there. And so I think that that's one of the things that we need to look at is, what existed before colonization, in that, we had roles and language for queer and two-spirit folks in our communities, that those existed and that those were there. And then it wasn't until colonization and religion came in that it started to change those roles and change how we see people, and how um, we demonize people, and how you have to be one or the other. And so that's when the binary system really came in, of just like, You have to be, if you're born a male, you have to be a man. If you're born female, you have to be a female. And then, you know, these structures that we were socialized under tell us that to be a man, you have to do XYZ. To be a woman, you have to do XYZ. And if you fall outside of those norms, you know, there's trouble. So, what does that trouble look like? Um, and so, I think that's a good starting point for us to realize that uh, that our what we would call traditions, you know, might look different from what they were originally before contact to now, and realize that. And I would encourage people to do that, just as you encourage folks to do land acknowledgements and to learn and know about the territories that you live on now currently, if they're not your own homelands. I would encourage people to look up and to research uh, what Two Spirit roles were in your tribes, your tribal communities, and what your language was for Two Spirit people. There are, you know, numerous tribes that have multiple genders, and not just like three, but like five and six. Um, you know, today we have, you know, 60 plus terms just for gender and gender identity. So there's a lot of language out there. There's a lot of history out there, and I think that to start breaking it down, we need to realize that there's more than just the binary system, and there's more than just heterosexual and homosexual. Like there's uh, a lot of layers in there for everybody, and just to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. So maybe we could I'll share a little story. You know, I grew up with the story about Pita Maka, and she was around mid 1800s, and she didn't fit into you know, the normal track. You know, you said XYZ. When she was 15 years old, and most likely her parents died in the we had a lot of smallpox epidemics. We're very familiar with epidemics and pandemics, TB. But she was 15, and both her parents died, and she had a couple of brothers and a couple of sisters underneath her. And so usually, if that happened, the children would be given. They would kind of be given to families that could take them in. And but Pita Maka, that means running eagle. She did not want to do that. And so she said, "No, we're going to keep our lodge." I mean, because we call our teepees the lodge. She said, "No, we're going to keep our lodge." And she said, "You boys, you know, and you got to hunt. You got to get, you know, you boys, and we'll keep this lodge." And she was 15, and she raised that family. And you know, and I think, you know, and she did. She started out with a different name, but and then she was discouraged because she wanted to go to war to go steal horses. You know, and so they took off. You know, they were heading over. You know, they don't say steal, they say take. We went to go take some horses. You know? So when they headed out, she had dressed like a man, so she wasn't as noticeable. And here she went with them, and they discovered her as they were there, and they were saying, "We can't have a woman here." And there was a medicine man with them, and he said, "No, no, no." He said, I have a good feeling about this. Let her come with us, and I think it'll bring us good luck. And so they brought her, and when they came up on the camp where they were going to take some horses, they let Peter Macaw said, "Let me go in first. I'm really, you know, let me sneak in and I'll cut some horses. You know, some they'd cut good buffalo hunters or pintos." And so they let her sneak in, and you know, she cut some horses and brought them back to the group. And then they were able to sneak in, and they brought back some horses. And then they left back home without any war or bloodshed. So then after that, they just allowed her to come with them to hunt and to go to war and to do all of these things. And I tell, so I grew up with learning about her because just over from here, Running Eagle Falls and Asa, if you come, I don't think we took you there when you visited, but when you come, I'd like to. At those falls, they say that where the waterfalls come out of the glacier, underneath is a cave, and that's where Pita Maka went and fasted. And they said that's where she got her true power, or she him she him got her true power. And because later on, she would never uh, they would ask, but she would never marry. And so but I say Pita Maka, I grew up with stories like that. And they have Terence Gardapi, he paints, she has a Kami Poismanix, a stand-up headdress. She's got her stand-up headdress, and she's on a pony, and she's going into battle. And so so maybe I'll ask you, Asa, what about when we're on colonizing? Because I think, if you grow up with stories like that, that's a different story than Dick and Jane. you know, it's it's a whole different kind of education. So maybe let me ask you this, Asa. Like with these stories that we grow up with, like when you're parenting, what should what should our young people, what should they hear, or how should they be educated on the proper pronouns in which to, or what questions should they ask? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think about that a lot because I am a parent of a 16-year-old, and it's been on my mind since since they came into this world. Um, and it's all around me right now, which I'm thankful for, in that I have a community uh, of friends who are also parenting and being mindful of gender and sexuality and assumptions that they put on their kiddos. And it starts early. You get pregnant, and the first questions are, is it a boy or a girl, or are you finding out? Well, who are we to say, uh, you know, and define that uh, for that child, unborn or here? So, and then once they're here, then it's pink and blue, and the socialization starts right away. Of, oh, you're a girl, so pink is what we're gonna get you, and then dolls are what you're gonna play with. And so we're already socializing that baby who's just pure and innocent and has no clue about gender and sexuality yet. And yet we're putting our beliefs and our practices and our, gender and sexuality socialization, we're socializing them to be a certain way. So I think it's important, like, to practice these things, and it's not easy. It's not something that happens right away. And I think that most people realize this, and there is a certain amount of patience that comes with this. Like for me personally, I transitioned 5 years ago, uh, and and in that transition, I really sat with myself for a really long time on what that meant for me, what that meant as a parent, what that would mean for my family. Um, and so I went through a lot of these different layers of meaning of what that was going to entail. Um, and I came to the conclusion that it wasn't just going to be my transition, but that if this was going to take place, that other people, I have to give, I don't have to, but I chose to give people space around me to transition with me. And so what that means is that I gave people space to have mistakes, because this is a new thing. People have known me for 35 years as one person and one name, and now I'm shedding another layer of the mask that I was talking about yesterday. I'm letting people know who I am and who I have been, uh, but what they're seeing is new to them, and what they're hearing is new to them. So I knew that I was going to have to make space for people to make mistakes. And it's hard. It gets harder as the years go by. And I don't really make as much space for mistakes now because I think I have an expectation now uh, that I'm hoping that people are being respectful and treating me well. But I think it all comes into practice. It all comes into um, making like a declaration for yourself that you're gonna learn something new and you're gonna practice something new. And so I think it's really important to, you know, even to like go the next step of uh, when you're in these type of meetings, and we're all in this Zoom world now. So even just changing your name on your screen to say Asa and then your pronouns after he him is a good step. Just announcing what they are is a good step. um, you know it provides more of a safe space. If people outside of those norms are hearing this language, then they know that you're thinking about it. You might not be the safest place or the safest space, and in all honesty, um, spaces aren't going to be perfectly safe for everyone, but we can do our best to make them as safe as possible. And so I think in starting to use these practices on our own, and maybe even dropping the he and she, and starting to practice they and them for everybody, that really opens up across the surface, and then people are curious about that. Oh, why are you using they? Why am I hearing they all the time? What does that mean? Um, and so then you're opening up a conversation to have with other folks who might not know what that language means, and then it's not putting all the responsibility on um, queer or trans folks to have to educate everybody else on that. You're then taking the responsibility for yourself as an ally to be like, I can take some of that weight off of this person that I love, and I can then educate somebody else who may not know about what's going on. So I think just opening up, like the simplest thing that we can start with is language, but it's one of the most powerful things that we can start with. And then just being respectful of people's names and identities. If someone identifies and they're telling you that they're a woman, then they're a woman. Respect that. If they're telling you that this is their name, that is their name, and respect that. And if you could imagine, the shoe being on the other foot, if someone calls you, oh sir, and I know that you've talked to me about this, Theda, about how when you talk on the phone, sometimes you can be mistaken for a man. Some people get really upset about that. Like, oh no, I'm not a man. I'm a woman. What are you doing? And could get really upset and angry about that. Where's that coming from? To start thinking about those things a little bit differently, I think is a good first start. And looking up this terminology. There's a lot of terminology. There's so much terminology that I don't know what it is, and this new Gen Z generation, they're creating not a lot of new terminology for themselves. Um, and it's really cool to see because of how powerful language is. Um, but it's growing and moving so fast that yeah, I can't keep up with terminology and some of the language, but I do know that it's important, and I do know that I look and ask uh, those questions myself of what are your pronouns, how do you like to be referred, like what's your name, are and asking even like nicknames too. Nicknames are important, and I think we all know that in Indian country too, like a lot of our families and folks in our community have nicknames, and those nicknames are even as important as their birth name, so or their chosen name. So
Mhm.
just being respectful and starting to think about language in a different way, and uh, opening up conversations with those around you who might not know what you're talking about.
Mhm. You know, that is such a mouthful, because I was thinking about, even in a lot of our tribes, Asa, like how children were given a name, like in our tribe, they try to give a young, if she's born a female, they try to give her a warrior name, because if you get a warrior's name, I mean, because my sister Lori, Ats the Nikiwa, our grandma named Ats the Nikiwa, named her that, and means kills close, you know, gets up and looks in your enemy's eyes and respects their life before you kill them. I mean, you know, so that's kind of like, you know, like that's just not Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's a name. So I think about, you know, I think about um, when just the naming ceremony. And, you know, when you're saying when we get on Zoom, you know, if we should put the pronoun that we like to be called. And then if people still, I work with Seattle Indian Health Board, and their cards and everything that they carry, everything that goes out from 300 employees has their pronoun on it, what they prefer to be called. And then they actually decided what their titles were, you know, traditional practitioner, chief of traditional practitioner department. So this powerful what you say around that words have power, and so then you know I know a lot of my two spirited relatives as they you say it's fluid, and I really see that fluidness as they get more comfortable with who they are, and say they even switch their name, you know, that their name they choose a different name. And I was just thinking about the terminology, because I know yesterday we had a couple of questions in the comments about what is non-binary, what is, can you just speak to that so that we can open the door for learning more.
Yeah. Like I was saying before, there's a lot of terminology out there these days, and it seems to continue to grow. Um, but non-binary came up a lot, and I think that's because I introduced my child as being non-binary. Um, and a lot of these terminologies are open, and I'll say it again, fluid. So non-binary doesn't mean necessarily just one thing. So it can be not identifying as male or female, but it can include identifying more towards uh, male or more towards female. Um, so when we're thinking about the system in general, just like an overview picture, the binary system is male and female. If you're non-binary, you're saying that you exist outside of that structure. Um, and by what I mean when I'm talking about what I'm saying fluid is that sometimes people will say that they're non-binary, but they do lean more towards female. So they don't identify as either, but they do lean towards female, or vice versa. They do lean towards male, or not at all. So um, again, it it is about one individual's experience and their identities. Um, and these aren't preferred identities, these are identities. So I think that's important to acknowledge as well. A good place, you know, again, Google is your best friend when when you're trying to research and learn something and not put all this weight and pressure and possibly trauma on somebody who lives this experience every day. But you know, there are good websites like uh, PFLAG, for instance. PFLAG is still running and existing. That's parents and family and friends of gay and lesbian folks. I think they've extended that, but their name. But PFLAG is a good place to start for folks learning terminology. And if you just Google, you know, gender terminology or sexuality terminology, you automatically get a lot of lists. Um, you know, but some of the language that I will be using will be that non-binary. Queer is an umbrella term just to identify the what we call sometimes the alphabet soup of LGBTQ and now 2S and I. And I use queer just so that I'm not leaving anybody out because, you know, LGBT gets really long. So LGBTQI2S is lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer and questioning, intersex, and then 2S is two spirit. So those letters vary as people's knowledge and awareness varies, and as you want to say, the acronym gets longer and longer. But and there are other identities that are left out of that. So that's why I tend to use queer, just because it's an umbrella term. Um, and for me, can, much like Two Spirit, can embody and represent sexuality and gender.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No, thank you for that. So then once we start to explore the fluidness and being respectful, it's about respect. Respecting what someone prefers to be called. Let's talk about the healing, the mental health, the wellness involved in this, because in our communities, from just say if we have homophobic, and then over here we have total acceptance. There's all of these these in betweens, where and some people are born into a homophobic family, but as they mature, especially when they spiritually mature, they move out of that, and and I know you have your story, and I just your story, and then you also said that you were part of the Portland area Two Spirited Society, and I know that there's several, there's a couple 20, 30 Two Spirited societies. um, let's explore the mental health around it, and I, when I say the mental health or the wellness, because a lot of my relatives, and these are my close relatives that I struggle, I I watch as they move through the fluidness, the use of drugs and alcohol in them out, because of the pain or the fear, or to subside some of that. And then I also, see that, if they get sober or they get clean, and then I also see the ones that just die. So that healing element, maybe we could spend a little bit of time, and I don't know if you want to share some of your story, but how do we, as we're being fluid, I guess, as we're being fluid and say we're parenting someone, or we're accepting in our families, how do we encourage the wellness and the healthiness around that? What do you think about that, Asa?
Yeah, I like that we're able to break it up here in different layers. I appreciate that. And as I said yesterday, like 2 hours really isn't enough. Like this is just scratching the surface to talk about this. And also I'm trying to keep in mind, the age spectrum, that this is all the way from being little to even being elder status. So it's affecting people differently, and different generations are included. The mental health, I think, is really important in all aspects, and there's different layers of that. Like yesterday we really talked about people, like the fear of losing community, the fear of losing culture, homelands and families, and some folks having to move to urban areas to find themselves and to find a sense of community and belonging. And I think that's really important, that our families need to realize, is that when we went away, some of us, to these urban areas, we found community, this queer community, that for the first time told us something that our families didn't, and that was that we weren't wrong, that we weren't sick, that we weren't bad, that everything about us was right, and our, even our, how we express our gender identity is right and correct for who we are, and it wasn't a bad thing. So I think we have to really acknowledge those communities that became our families, and became our communities after, suffering such a great loss. Um, for the mental health, I mean, there's so much trauma and so much layers to this, depending on your identity. If you're a gay man, if you're a lesbian, if you're trans, like there's a lot of varying levels of people's experiences, and pain and resilience too. I want to put that in there, because as Indigenous people, we're very resilient. As Two-Spirit queer people, we're amazingly resilient, the things that we've been through. And I think that in our search for community, a lot oftentimes in urban areas and even in rural areas, that that gay bars and clubs became that place where we found community. And uh, in my experience, gay clubs and bars were more than just a place with music and alcohol. Like, we ended up having birthday parties there, and Thanksgivings there, and Christmas is there, and all these different celebrations, even baby showers. So like, there's a broad range of experience that happen in these places, and unfortunately, oftentimes there is a lot of pain, or whatever goes into alcoholism and drug abuse that happens there. And then we have a whole another new layer of trauma to go through, and another layer of healing that has to take place later on down the line. And oftentimes, as Indigenous people, we know that snowballs into other things, and that can lead to more loss of family, that can lead to like rape and murder, death, and so in looking at mental health, there's like a lot of different ways to look at it. But I think that, like I talked about with the practice, putting into practice, I think it really comes back to looking at our families and our starting points, and how we were supported as who we were as young people, and how our culture accepted us or didn't accept us. And I really think culture is key in all of our healing as Indigenous people, whether we're Two-Spirit or not. Um, and having conversation about this with other Two-Spirit people, there's uh, there's been a lot of discussion in my circles of how we don't feel safe or welcome in ceremony space. And so think about that. If we're, the saying that we're spirits having a human experience. Well, ceremonies are for spirits. And so if we're left out of those spaces, how are we to heal completely on our own, And I just think that our families and our communities need to be mindful of that we're missing. We have a big hole in us. We're missing these spaces, and they're important to us. And I think that's really uh, one of the things that really made me gravitate towards Two-Spirit societies when I found them. And then when I found my first one, which was Northwest Two-Spirit Society in Seattle, man, I like clutched onto them and didn't want to let them go, and asked them a million questions. And will you be my auntie? And will you be my uncle? And can I come to this space every time that it's available? And where else can I go? And who else can I meet? And those spaces became so important to me because, like I said yesterday, it was a space for the first time in my life where I didn't have to explain myself as an Indigenous person. I didn't have to explain myself as a Two-Spirit person. Everybody in the room was just like me. And so we then just got to experience each other as people. And we also got to experience ceremony as we put it on. But I also think we need to be mindful too, within our LGBTQ queer community, that just like Indigenous communities have lateral oppression where we bring each other down, um, in our queer community, we still do have phobia. Like, homophobia and transphobia is so ingrained in our culture that it's even impacted us as queer and trans people. And then we oppress each other through those phobias. So I think that, we need to be mindful of that as well. And oftentimes our Two-Spirit ceremony spaces are set up on this binary system, and exclude people outside of that, and not on purpose. Their intention isn't negative. I don't think. It's just that uh, they're running ceremony as they have always experienced ceremony, if they've experienced it in their homelands or where they initially had their experience. And I think even as a queer community, we need to be expanding that and being more fluid within our own ceremony spaces and our own healing spaces. Because even though I present, um, and can often what we call pass as a cisgender male, there are folks out there who don't pass, and their goal is not to pass. And they live in a non-binary space, and when we have that binary system and we're working within it as two-spirit people, we're then excluding some of our community and some of our most vulnerable community who needs that healing, I think, the most. And so, yeah, there's just a lot of layers in there, but I think a good starting point is right in what how they say right in our own backyard,
Mhm.
and with our culture, with our community, with our powwows. Like it's so incredible to me, like to be a part of these spaces where we're now here in my community, in Grand Entry. There's a two-spirit space for Grand Entry, and they also have, you know, signage that says, "You're welcome as you are for who you are, and you can dance wherever you would like. But we do have this special space for you to honor you." That's incredible to me. Like I never thought I would see that in my life, and so that's powerful. And to know that my child has grown up just knowing that that exists and knowing that that's a norm, that is incredible too. So I think that once we start these practices, once we accept people for who they are and how they are, um,
Mhm.
those become norms in and of themselves. And so our children grow up seeing those things and knowing that it's they them, knowing that, yeah, little boys might be wearing fingernail polish, and to not criticize them or say, do you know you're a boy and you're not supposed to be doing that, but say, wow, that's a beautiful color that you're wearing today. You know,
Mhm.
take a different approach, um, and really work on your own acceptance, and think about why maybe you don't have acceptance and what that's about, and that might live in your house, not in somebody else's house.
Mhm. And thank you. So we invite all of you to look at that acceptance. I can think of two just mini short stories. You know, in our beaver bundle ceremonies and our thunderpipe and our ceremonies, there's always a position, you know, where on one side there's the men sit and one side the women sit, but it's also a position of, you know, bundle holders and ones that have done healing, you know, for many many years. And I've seen some of our two spirit be allowed to sit wherever they want. You know, like you know, if they want to sit what they choose. And you know, and of course, you know how Indians are, like, you know, well, you know, and that they get to choose where they want to sit. You know, it's not like a designate, and that's just okay, and the ceremony still goes on and all the prayers are said. I think of another story where I think there was a level of acceptance. It was a couple years back, and one of my close relatives, who is two spirited, um, announced to Browning Public Schools that they wanted to start an LGBTQ um, support club. So you know they so then the day that he went in and was going to start this club, you know, he was like really nervous, and so he asked his grandma on the way, "Grandma, could you buy me a, you know, they gave him space and he didn't know who was going to show up. And he said, Grandma, can you buy me a dozen donuts so I could at least, you know, like have for this is our first meeting of our club." And so grandma bought him a dozen donuts, and he went. And I just remember hearing, and this is hearing through her, you know, through grandma. She said he went and 33 showed up to the first meeting. and, and so he had to cut the donuts not in half, but like cut them in thirds and kind of like so that they're, you know, at least everyone could have a bite of a donut. You know. And so I just share that, like, I see that in acceptance. And then I think, you know, my relatives, I was just invited, my mother and I, to come to the next two spirited powwow in San Francisco, where thousands, you know, it's thousands come to that effort. Um, Asa, what else in the storyline? Because you know it is, yeah, we got these 2 hours, but what else? How can we behave better as our, you know, I was just like, because we can't, like, take all the homophobics and dunk them on the head, or like, boing, magic wand, you are now not homophobic. It's just like we can't, bonk people on the head and say, boing, you aren't racist. It's kind of, how do we begin to heal around some of this? And because I just want to pick your brain, because we appreciate what you say right now and what you're sharing with us.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be nice for that magic wand to exist. That's for sure. Unfortunately, I think it's I'm not sure. I can just hear my grandma and my grandpa in my head right now, but it's just like a lot of hard work, in all honesty. And there's a lot of layers to it. A lot of layers. There's a lot of layers that exist in our world, and when we start looking at like decolonization, then we're looking at like patriarchy. We're looking um, at different things that influence how we're socialized. And so I think it's just important to maybe like when you're doing your research to also just stop and think about the ways that you were socialized. And some people aren't even sure. Sometimes, there's classes and trainings that I've been to, and people will tell you, oh no, I just like this. Like I like makeup and hairspray and getting all dolled up, and that's my choice. That's something I did. It's not something anybody else told me. Um, and so they're in a space where they're not even realizing that that was influenced by, you know, um, popular culture, where they, where whoever was in their homes was teaching them. Like it's all uh, internalized, and so we get to a point where we don't realize that we were socialized that way, or that we were influenced by outside things. So I think it's good to stop and think about that, um, and then just to be thinking about putting in practice ways to um, support people, and ways to acknowledge our youth. Like I want to keep in mind safety. I know we talked about earlier, and like when an auntie or when somebody in your family just knows something is different about you, or that you may identify as Two Spirit or LGBT. Definitely don't out folks. Move at their pace, and follow their leads. But you can also be a supportive person without going, haha, I know that I know that you're queer, and so this, that, or the other. But we can still be supportive and walk with people, and be a good ally in creating spaces for more and new language, and then opening spaces to people. Like think about that. Like oftentimes when we have events, meetings, what have you, there are a lot of things that we don't think about. For example, a good one I think is disability. Like if you don't have a disability, it's not on your mind. You don't think that, oh, we have this event and it has stairs. Well, how is somebody going to get in if they need a wheelchair? We don't often think about those things unless we're forced to think about them. So I think it's good to put into practice, learning more outside of yourself, um, and knowing that you can create a better space for people who don't look like you, um, and that you can be supportive in those ways. And yeah, I think just kind of stepping outside of yourself and learning more about what's going on, and just being mindful too. I think that the like I said, those things exist in our Two Spirit communities too, where some people might feel left out or not included. And so just thinking about how we can include those folks, and small simple stuff like changing language, um, and changing the way that we might put spaces together.
Hmm. Hmm. When like when you say the word and I hear the word patriarchy, I mean, just when I hear that word, and we think of kings and queens, and and patriarchy, and then songs made, it's a man's world, kind of like, or that umbrella that's put upon us, because I was just thinking in a lot, like even with Native Wellness Institute, we we kind of we've started to just make everything in a circle, and then even on our Zooms now, they're gatherings and just making it a circle, because in the circle there's no one's the boss, they're all a part of, I think about that put up on us. It's kind of like when I was trying to decide what to wear today, what I was going to dress in, I was thinking to myself, shoot, I've been dressing like an Indian for a long time. I like, you know, I don't, I don't look at commercials and dress like them. I don't dress like, and so I just, in 2004, I mean, AC, some of this around tobacco, because I think that's where we first met when we were doing sacred tobacco. I was invited to Australia and New Zealand. And when I went to New Zealand, the elders, I wanted to be respectful. So I kept asking protocol, and I kept saying, can you please just, I don't want to disrespect. So finally, the only thing they asked for in New Zealand is they asked that when I got up to speak to them, because they were all the heads, the ones that have the kings, and they were the matriarchs and the patriarchs. So they didn't use those terms, but they were the bosses, male and female, in between. And this is what they told me is and it changed me. They said, when when she comes and she speaks to us and speaks to our elders, please have her dress like her ancestors, not her oppressors. you know and so from that moment, so then I started being different, like I was thinking, I wanted to, my mother always says, we always, no matter what gender, we always adorned, we don't look, she instructed us when we moved back home. She said, don't be just going around in sweatpants, you gotta. And so, like, this how we appear, because you also said something that for safety, for safety, what if, what is, because like how we dress, we got what we like to be called, we the pronoun that we like to be called, how we dress, how we present ourselves. Can you talk about some of that in terms of the transitions, that fluidness with the age, the age appropriate? I, I mean, I know that's a giant question, but can you say some things to that? Because I think we're opening a door where we might have to have part 3 and part 4.
Yeah, I agree that there needs to be more parts. And I think it varies with ages. What I'm seeing with my own kid and this Gen Z group is that um, they're breaking those rules, and they're creating new rules for themselves, and that it's anything goes, and that you're celebrated for whatever expression you're having. And it seems kind of like you're cheered on a little bit more if you go bigger in breaking those rules. Um, and so, I applaud that definitely. And am all for that. And I love that I have these friends who are having new babies and using non-binary terminology, to speak to their little ones and to raise their little ones. Um, I have a lot of little young ones who, the world sees as being little boys who are, might be wearing tutus and painting their nails, and that's a norm. That's a normal thing in their homes, and that's a beautiful thing, to be having that space for everybody. And why do we have toys that are gendered? And Why do we have certain clothes that are gendered? So those are good things to think about if you've never thought about them. I think for
Mhm.
our older generation, you know, like, and I say for myself too, like there was like this, there's a lot of issues around safety. Um, you know, a lot of folks, I know my elders had to use certain things, certain articles of clothing, maybe to identify themselves and their identity to other folks in the queer and two-spirit communities. But it was an effort to be safe and to keep their identities under wraps, you know. So I think that those expressions have come a long way, and used to, you know, keep everything undercover, um, to now where it's just like people are fully expressing themselves regardless of whatever rules were ever set, or, you know, not set but are adhered to as a society. Um, and then, yeah, the safety thing is a big uh, focus for me as a trans person. You know, you know, in history, you know, lesbian, gay, bisexual people have been harmed and hurt um, for their identity. Um, as a trans person, uh, there's a lot of focus on murder, and that's a really hard thing to hear and a hard thing to be a part of, and to know that you know, statistically trans women are being killed at a higher rate than any of our other community members. And so um, yeah, it leaves a big hole in my heart, and it's definitely something that's on my mind, uh, and makes me question my safety no matter where I'm at. And so I'm constantly thinking about that. I'm constantly thinking about my safety when I travel with my child, and you know how, like, if something were to happen to me, would they be cared for, and who would help them in that instance? And so, you know, that's a harsh reality for me, um, but you know, other people don't have to think about that, and so that's a good thing to know and be aware of too, that you know, trans people are being murdered for uh, being their true selves, and just, yeah, it's a scary but like it's reality that lives, I think, within me and other trans folks, and you know, still like LGBT folks. You know, there's still, that's a reality that hits home for all of our community. And I think, you know, as Indigenous folks, we can relate to that with our missing, murdered Indigenous women. And so, you know, if you're thinking, you know, about your sisters, please be mindful and aware of all the trans folks in your community that might have lost their lives because, you know, they were brave enough and just too tired to wear that mask anymore, and that they really felt like they need to be who they are, and that they were for the first time sharing their medicine with you. um, you know, and that's a gift. You know, I've always been told that this is a gift creator gave me, um, and so for me to share that with you, I mean, that's a gift for you as well. And if we're being murdered, you know, everyone's missing out on that, and it's just, yeah, it's a very emotional topic for sure.
Mhm. And I, you know, and I can hear it in your voice, you know, and I always like touch because I see we're asking everyone that's watching this power hour to how can you be an ally, and how, you know, stepping into that so that you're an advocate as an ally of that young child that is expressing differently or expressing themselves. And as you, because missing and murdered, you know, I was just in Native Wellness Institute had me be involved in a lot of the research of violence in Indian country, and you know, one of, and the protective factors. And it's interesting because one of the major protective factors is cultural identity, that you know, if you know who you are, if you know who you are, that makes you more resilient. but at the same time, you know, there is that that violence attached to missing and murdered Indigenous persons, you know. And so then I would say part of we need to roll up our sleeves and to build the allies so that there's the safety nets around all of our people, and it's so that they aren't left alone, are targeted. And you know it, and speaking up, you know, speaking up in arenas, not allowing that degradation or that pounding down of a person, to step up for them. Just, you know, just like my my little relative with all the donuts, you know. We just kept, so because of that, he's on full scholarship and he's pre-med, you know, because of the support that he got from these 33 that grew to bigger and bigger, and that it was accepted that it was okay who he was and how he defined himself, you know. So I would look at that alliance. But you know, right before we came on, we were Shailene just told us that Deb Holland put put in as head of the Department of Interior, and then I could hear Asa yelling, and I could hear, we were all like, yay, you know. But even that, a Native woman put in that leadership position. So maybe ending on a positive note, Asa, what do you think about our people? I mean, like, you know, I I mean, like our native, our indigenous people, like Deb Holland, you know, how, what about how do you see the future with leadership and having more of our LGBTQ two spirited or queer, electing them into leadership roles? Let's talk about, what do you think about that?
I think it's really important and I just want to say that I'm like really grateful to be alive during a time when we as Indigenous communities have been doing so much healing and are to a point where we can declare that we want to move within self-determination. Like we want to be the narrators of our stories. Um, we want to be ones. We want to be the ones deciding, you know, our futures. I think that's really important because I think for a long time we've been stuck in sadness and been stuck in trauma, and I think that we're realizing the ways out of that and finding those healing spaces. And so I think it's really important that we need to make sure that we have two-spirit trans folks be a part of that work, um, and giving us the perspective that they do, kind of, and seeing from uh, you know, those male and female roles, and outside the binary system, I think is really important. Um, we've always had leadership roles throughout history, and I think that, you know, just as we've followed our other roles that we've consistently held, that soon we'll be in those positions again, and that it takes our community working on that and accepting us for who we are and creating those spaces and practicing, you know, that new language, practicing those new ideas within, uh, you know, the history that existed pre-contact, you know, the history that comes from our tribes and and our people, and not just colonizers or religion. So I'm really excited about the future, and I'm really excited for uh, Indigenous folks. And like, this just shows how much we shine in resilience.
Yeah, and you know, and it's way beyond shining. It's like brilliant. I mean, I just, you know, hearing that news, having you come on our power hour and start to open a door, you know, that we want to continue having, you know, our country is you know, as I just see God, as we're getting vaccinated and as we're evolve, people have transformed. People have taken a hard look at who they see in the mirror, and looking at how they can accept and forgive and behave as better humans, you know. And so what would be and I because I want to, what would be your closing comments um to allies out there, because we got some pretty good allies that come on every day around this area. What would be your closing thoughts? And not like, not that we're not asking you to solve all, just some closing thoughts, before we have closure today. Um, and I
Yeah,
thank you. I just like thank you, Asa. But what kind of closing thoughts before we sign off?
yeah, thank you too. Like I said, I'm grateful to be here and grateful to speak on this subject. And I think just know that this was, you know, pieces of my experience and my perspective. Um, and uh, this is just scratching the surface. There's so much more that could be covered and talked about, and history that exists. And so I would just encourage you to learn that history, to look up, Two Spirits in your tribes and communities, to look up something on Two Spirit history. There's a lot of things that exist that are also contemporary too, not just like pre-contact stuff, but there are a lot of Two Spirits, successful Two Spirits living uh in our communities today. What are they doing? You have Two Spirit trans folks in your community. I know that you know somebody who is Two Spirit and trans, and you just might not even realize that. So I think just taking some time to learn for yourself, and practicing some of those new terms that you might learn, and making space for new people, and just the basics. Just be respectful of those and their identities as they are of you.
Mm-hmm. Well, Asa, on behalf of Native Wellness Institute, we just want to thank you so much. We were just so excited. We got a couple workshops going on, and they even paused so that they could come and watch you on the Power Hour. And then people were taking a break. They're saying, Ace is going to be on the Power Hour, And then, so we want to thank you for coming and opening this door. And Native Wellness Institute, we have an ongoing healthy relationship curriculum that addresses some of the sexuality issues and some of the gender issues and exercises. And so come join us with that. But Asa, we want to extend our hug, our cyber hug. We want to shake your hand. And sometimes I was like to I don't know where that comes from, which culture, but I just want to give you reverence for coming on and speaking about these things and opening the door for us. It's our 39th week, of Power Hour, and we're at a place where we're digging into deeper healing, and you provided us with so much that we can begin to all move into that wellness track and that healing around LGBTQ, Two-Spirit and queer communities. So thank you, Asa.
Yeah.
And we'll say Holland. So we'll close now, and we'll see you soon in person, Asa.
All right. Sounds good. See you.
Care. All right.